I've got a special guest on the line from Sydney. I've got Bob Mendelsohn, who is the National Director for Jews for Jesus, and Bob joins me now. Good afternoon, Bob.
Shalom, Shane.
Thanks for your time today.
Always happy to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, a special event happening this Sunday at sundown. It's the Jewish New Year.
It begins globally and almost begins here in Australia.
Sounds like
Rosh Hashanah is the name of the holiday. It means head of the year. And it's an unusual one because it's really the first day of the 7th month of the Jewish calendar, according to the book of Exodus.
Right, okay. And 5,776, that's years since creation.
That's the number of the year. That's the one we're turning the calendar 5776, since Adam was created.
Oh, wonderful. We'll be talking about this in just a moment, Bob. But I'd like for you to share with our audience today, Bob, about you grew up as in a Jewish community and from Kansas. What was it like growing up in this Orthodox Jewish community?
It was Kansas City, and it was 1951 when I was born. That was an era of calm and black and white television, of people who didn't even own a key to their house until they sold it. So it was a different kind of world than we live in today.
I can imagine.
As an Orthodox Jew, we were a community within a community. So there were about 22,000 Jews in Kansas City, right in the center of the United States. And most of them, 2 generations earlier, had been immigrants. But by the time I came along, we were pretty stock standard for a Kansas City community. But there was always a distinction between who we were and who the Gentile neighbors were. So community doesn't necessarily look like a village, that is, where people are neighbors next door and next door and next door, but rather we were a community of this one on that street and that one on the other street who met together at synagogue or Jewish community center. We knew who we were, and we were a we within the general wider we.
Right. And growing up, Bob, it was, I believe you had was it very strict for you growing up?
I had no idea how strict it was. I just knew it was normal. But when I started encountering Jewish people who didn't keep the commandments like I did, I found that we were, in fact, pretty strict. So keeping kosher, keeping the Sabbath, keeping the Jewish holidays like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that was pretty standard for us.
Bob Mendelsohn is my guest today, and Bob is the Director for Jews for Jesus. And we're talking about, at the moment, we're talking about Bob's life growing up, but also the fact that it is the Jewish New Year, and it starts this Sunday at sundown and at 5:07. So, Bob, tell us about your encounter with Jesus. How did this all come about?
It was certainly nothing I was looking forward to. I was a stock standard Jewish guy. I went through my bar mitzvah when I was 13. I continued in Jewish education throughout the next few years. And for me, that Jewish people were abandoning the Jewish faith, I thought was a shame. So when I went to university in 1969, I gathered other young Jewish men like me to pray together, to go to synagogue, etc. So Jewish was who I was, and it was how I practiced. When it was about a year later, and I became a pretty serious hippie, university dropout, hitchhiking around the United States, Judaism took a more back seat. And I was more interested in meaning and relevance than I was what Rabbi so-and-so said. As a result, I was open-minded to any kind of philosophy and to reading all kinds of publications. So I ran into some Jesus freaks, and they told me about their Savior. I took them on. I won the Bible battle. I knew my stuff way better than they did, but they gave me a copy of the New Testament. And it was in the reading of that St. Matthew and St. Mark and St. John. I thought they were all Catholics. When I read this book, I found the consummate hippie and the man of peace and love, and that's what I wanted.
Wow.
But I'm Jewish, and Jews don't believe in Jesus. So I had an identity conflict, as you can imagine. And it was in the meeting together with another Christian, and I said, I really want this Jesus stuff, but I don't want your Jesus. And she said to me, you don't get this Jesus stuff unless you take Jesus as your Savior. So that night, May 71, under a full moon, I prayed and I asked Jesus to be my Savior. I had new life. I had forgiveness. But I went home and told my family, and I didn't have family as an immediate result. They kicked me out of the house.
Oh, wow. That must have been very hard for you.
I think it was hard for them as well as hard for me, because we as a Jewish community always knew who we were. Now I was an outsider, and that was painful on so many levels.
My guest today is Bob Mendelsohn, who is the Director for Jews for Jesus Australasia. And Bob, this territory now includes Singapore and New Zealand. Is that a new thing for your territory?
Well, it's certainly nothing I was anticipating when I grew up in Kansas City. But coming to faith in Jesus changed my whole perspective on things, and the community widened to include believers in Moscow and Buenos Aires, wow, and even Sydney and even Newcastle. Come on. So when I moved in 1998 with my wife and kids from New York City to launch Jews for Jesus Australia, I thought it was Sydney. And then it became Sydney and Melbourne. Then it became Anzac. And then Singapore. It just keeps growing. All the different places where people are keen to hear about Jewish things, learn about Jewish people, and are compassionate towards and evangelizing Jewish people, which is really what I'm always hoping for.
Well, that brings us to the celebration of the new year, Bob. What is the importance of this celebration for Jews, and what is its significance for Christians?
There are 7 appointments that God lists in Leviticus 23, including Passover and Pentecost, etc. And number 5 is Rosh Hashanah. That's the new year that we're celebrating, called in that chapter the day of the blowing of trumpets. And holiday 6 is not really a holiday when you think of celebrations. It is the Day of Atonement, when God and people are supposed to become one together. And this idea of atonement is so important. It is really the pinnacle of the Jewish religion, both in biblical terms and in modern day. So the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are called the 10 days of awe. And it's a time when we're supposed to reflect and beat our breast and cry out to God that we might be forgiven, a time to get right with neighbor and family. Without the forgiveness, then it's merely a formality. And for most Jewish people, I think this is a time of, wouldn't it be nice if I were forgiven? Wouldn't it be nice if there were a God? Wouldn't it be nice if we could all get along? So the idea of atonement, which is biblical, is really important for us to be communicating just now to Jewish people, and dare I say, everyone.
Absolutely. Bob Mendelsohn is my guest today, and Bob is the National Director for Jews for Jesus. And Bob, thanks so much for your time today. We could go on and chat a lot longer, but time has gotten away on us, unfortunately. But thank you so much for sharing about your life, and of course for this new year, which starts this Sunday, doesn't it?
That's correct. Sunday night, all Jewish holidays begin in the evening before what's listed in your Hallmark diary. So this is another one of those. And 10 days later, I tell you what, if the people who are listening online or listening live to us just now would extend an opportunity to their Jewish mates and colleagues and doctors to consider who Jesus is as maybe the forgiver of their sins. This is the prime time. This is really peak hour for Jewish people in considering this message. So I hope that the church will be praying for us, praying for Jewish people to have eyes open, and praying for their own courage to share this message with people who didn't exactly invite them to be their chaplain.
Well said. Bob, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Ever grateful. Thanks, mate.
Thank you. That's Bob Mendelsohn, the National Director for Jews for Jesus.